are the voice of trucking. Well, welcome everybody to Key Up New York, Tanny's podcast. I'm Kendra Hems, president with the Trucking Association of New York. I am joined this morning by my counterpart, partner in crime.
I am Zach Miller, the Director of Metro Region Operations for the Trucking Association of New York.
Great, Zach. And we are really honored to have with us this morning Andrew Boyle. Andrew is the current chairman of the American Trucking Associations, and as we've mentioned before, we're the state affiliate for ATA. So really happy to have Andrew with us, and Andrew is also the co-president of Boyle Transportation. So Andrew, welcome. Happy to have you with us this morning.
Kendra and Zach, it's great to be with you, particularly as you know, our company is a longtime Tanny member, and I harbor, as a Bostonian, I will harbor no resentment, particularly towards Zach and the New York City area members. So, I'm trying to get over that in the spirit of collaboration today, and no kind of ill will toward any Nets, Knicks, Bills, Jets, Giants, and particularly the Yankees and Mets.
Well, I appreciate that as a diehard Mets Jets fan. It's been a rough 20 years for us, so I thank you.
Well, Andrew, for what it's worth, we can split the difference because I am a Yankees fan, I am a Giants fan, but I kind of split when it comes to basketball, and I'm actually a Boston Celtics fan. So we're good in that area.
How can you not be?
Right?
In Zach's lifetime, he hasn't seen a Celtics, a Knicks championship. So
a couple of finals losses.
Yeah.
Anyways, so geography aside, really, really happy to have you here. As you said, longtime member of Tanny, obviously a longtime member of ATA as well. And later on, we'll kind of talk about the importance of membership in associations. But we always like to start off with an icebreaker question. So I wanted to kick it off this morning by asking, if you could instantly become an expert in one thing, what would it be?
Perhaps physics or some type of engineering, whether it's electrical engineering, computer science. I have no knowledge or expertise whatsoever in that field, but in terms of how we advance the human condition, between biomedical engineering or some sort of physics that would improve our ability to harness energy or improve the kind of human condition, our ability to sustain life, that's probably something that would be most beneficial to my fellow people on Earth.
I like it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
One thing I love about icebreakers is you never know what kind of answer you're going to get, and I definitely wouldn't have expected that one. So
no, I thought you were going to say something like EV related. That was my guess.
Oh, Lord. Unfortunately, we're all becoming experts in that area, whether we want to or not, I think. That's great. So we've got a number of items that we wanted to touch on today. That is kind of being handled both at the national level as well as the state level. And obviously, I think any of our peers across the country and state associations are dealing with many of these issues as well. And they're important for the industry to know kind of what we're doing and what we're working on as it relates to it. So some priorities, I think, both for ATA, these are things that have popped up on the operational issues report that ATRI does every year, and challenges for the industry. So with that, I think we can kind of dive right into it. And one of the big things that we hear about a lot, particularly as we're talking about the human element, is truck parking and what's being done with that. So we know there's a significant shortage of truck parking across the country. It's one parking spot for every 11 trucks. When it comes to what's important to drivers, truck parking is one of the top things that they cite every year. So can you speak maybe a little bit to kind of from the national level, what's going on and some of the things that are happening there? Because there is some good stuff that's actually going on right now as it relates to that.
Absolutely. It's a great testament to the efforts by ATA and our state partners to put front and center the case that professional truck drivers perform an essential role in the nation's economy, and we have to put them in a position to be successsul. And ATA has taken an all of the above approach and a bipartisan approach. We have gotten bipartisan engagement, not only bicameral and bipartisan in Congress, but also at the agency level. And Secretary Buttigieg, to his credit, has really been a champion for to advocate for carve-outs of funding from the US DOT in through congressional coffers that ultimately, as you all know, have to filter down to the states. The states are the ones that have to appeal for the dollars and ultimately deploy them. Now, ATRI, the American Transportation Research Institute, does a great job in terms of identifying bottlenecks and shortages of truck parking. So the intent is not to just kind of have a free-for-all in terms of federal funding, but rather deploy that capital in a smart fashion, in a strategic way, both to improve parking, and then it's similar with bottlenecks, right? So how can we use infrastructure funds to smartly reduce congestion?
Absolutely. I'm going to avoid the congestion topic at the moment. Our previous
Yes.
podcast focused on congestion pricing in New York City, and I vowed we would not talk about that today. But no, to your point with the national funding, like that has been huge. And I think the relationship that ATA has built with the administration and with Secretary Buttigieg in particular has really done so much for this industry, both from infrastructure funding. We've been awarded infrastructure funds here in New York that have been put in place to address some key issues, some bridges that needed to be replaced, which has been huge. But then to the truck parking, we are right now in the midst of doing a feasibility study along I-84 in New York State, where the New York State Department of Transportation's included that as part of their freight plan to add truck parking along that corridor. It's a big one as it relates to, from Pennsylvania through New York into Connecticut, a lot of truck traffic and really not a lot of parking available. So we're really excited about that. And then we've had some great successes in New York City, surprisingly enough. But
it really has been incredible the last couple of years. The New York City Council passed a landmark truck parking bill last year to create at least 3 new off-street truck parking facilities throughout the 5 boroughs. And in addition, we're working on another piece of legislation with the city council that would allow overnight truck parking in the 21 industrial business zones. And speaking of the industrial business zones, the Port Authority late last year also announced that they are tripling their capacity for their truck parking facility at JFK. So New York City has really gotten the message that, these truck drivers are essential workers. They work really hard. There are federal hours of service that they must meet, and they deserve that safe place to park and rest. And I got to give credit to the agencies and the council for taking leadership on that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important.
And you all, you can approach it in a fashion that's kind of the moral high ground, right? This is something that it doesn't have a political party affiliated with it. This is an essential need for infrastructure, for people, and particularly as we look to try to draw more female professional drivers into the industry. That if you don't have a safe place to park each night, or you don't have confidence that you're going to have a safe place to park, who wants to do that job? One of our my great colleagues here at Boyle Transportation, Laura Duryea, served on the Women of Trucking Advisory Board at FMCSA over the past year and a half. And I have to say the agency was very receptive to input on that particular topic. So we're thrilled that we're getting a lot of traction across the political spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is so important because it is bipartisan.
Yep.
It's the right thing to do. Our drivers are what keep our economy going. They deserve a safe place to park, a secure place to park. And I think that's really a great segue into workforce development because to your point, it can be a disincentive. Why would somebody want to come into the industry if they're not guaranteed a nice place where they can stop and rest and get their time off duty that's required? So truck parking is certainly a component as we're talking about how do we attract more individuals to the trucking industry. So to that point, I wanted to touch on just quickly the driver shortage numbers because there was an update last year that kind of makes it seem like we're addressing the driver shortage. So coming out of the pandemic, we were around 80,000. And then I think it was at MC&E, the ATA's annual conference last year, it came out that number had dropped to 60,000. But I don't think that's necessarily indicative of us solving the driver shortage problem, right? There were other factors that played into that, the economy being one, inflation being one, and the closure, of Yellow which displaced about 30,000 drivers there that went on then to find other jobs. So it continues to be an issue that we are, it's a priority for us here at the association. I know it's a priority at ATA as well. So maybe just touch on some of the things at ATA in terms of what you're focusing on as it relates to workforce dev.
Well, fundamentally, what motivates me is to create good blue-collar American jobs, right? And that is a great story that we in our industry can communicate to policymakers. So nearly 8 million Americans working in a trucking-related job, most of whom are professional drivers, mechanics, and work in some other capacity that doesn't require hundreds of thousands of dollars in college debt. What a great opportunity, particularly in recent years as wages have risen dramatically. And unfortunately, college tuition, which I can attest to, has risen at a far greater rate than inflation, unconscionably to some extent, right? So we have that disparity where it's becoming less compelling to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially in a degree that may or may not pay off. And here we have this great opportunity where real serious wages paying to professional drivers and others who work in the industry. So we have to start with that kind of high ground where we have this great opportunity, and particularly as manufacturing jobs can come and go with globalization, automation, offshoring, that we can't be offshored. Right. So the opportunity we have to convey to young people is significant. And not all professional truck driver jobs are created equal. It's not a monolith, our industry. It's massive and it's incredibly diverse in their various segments, right? Whether it's local, the vehicle type, the route type, et cetera. So there's a menu for aspiring professional truck drivers to choose from. So yes, the demands or the gaps or the shortage, so to speak, year to year can vary somewhat and ebb and flow a little bit with the macro economy, particularly the goods economy, as we know, has been soft for the past really 5 quarters. But long term, it's a structural issue. So there's a demographic issue with many professional drivers kind of aging toward retirement, a well-deserved retirement in many cases. And we're trying to draw folks, as you know, you can't drive interstate trucking unless you're at least 21. We just, as a kind of a development tool to try to advocate for the 18 to 20-year-olds to have an opportunity with tons of criteria as far as training and safety and oversight to kind of develop the skill set where they could become interstate truck drivers. That's one path. But I think the overarching theme has to be the opportunity that we have relative to other things that maybe a teenager or somebody in the 20s is looking at. And many of the folks at our company are career changers. So maybe they were on a different path, and then mid-career or midlife, perhaps, they have just different set of circumstances, and then they're able to drive over the road. Most of our professional drivers are in a team setting, so 2 drivers to a truck. And it can be really conducive to folks who are maybe empty nesters. It can be a pretty darn good earning opportunity for folks. So, yeah, and that's not unique to us in terms of the gap in perception. I was in the EU with Chris Beer, our CEO, and Bob Costello, our chief economist, in November, and similarly, they're dealing with the misperception by young people that the truck driving jobs will be automated very soon, and that maybe they shouldn't even pursue it because it's going to be obsolete. Well, in my personal opinion, I don't think the widespread displacement of professional truck drivers is a near-term event for decades, really. It's exciting, the innovation with respect to autonomous technologies, but we view them for quite a long time as being driver assist technologies, making things safer, maybe a little bit less intimidating and accessible to more people, as opposed to displacing the professional driver altogether in meaningful numbers.
Right. Yeah. And I am so glad that you touched on that. because we hear that a lot too, even within our own legislature, like automation, and now we're not going to have jobs, and the labor unions oftentimes push back on it. And to your point, it's not going to displace the driver. It's just going to change how they operate the vehicle. Like I agree 100%. I don't know that it's going to be in our lifetime, or at least during our careers, that we see full automation of the commercial vehicle industry. There's too many components there. Particularly from a safety aspect, that I think that is so far down the road that any thought that we're going to address the driver shortage through automation just really is unrealistic.
Yeah, and I look at it as the opposite too, because we're trying to attract younger people that are so incredibly tech savvy. I mean, the technology in these vehicles is incredible. I mean, it looks like the old spaceships basically. And so I think there's actually a really great, what's the proper phrase, product market fit, I think, with a lot of the people we're trying to get in, because this technology is something that really does speak to them. And I mean, I could see it being similar to commercial aviation, where the autopilot does a lot of the work, but you still have two people in the cockpit. You're just never going to get that human out of there.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with the younger generation, we talk a lot too about we have to change their perception of the industry and the image of the industry. Like, this isn't the industry of 50 years ago. You know, the trucks have changed, the operations have changed, the technology has changed, and these are no longer just jobs. These are pathways to careers, and this is a big thing that we focus on as part of our development. You hear so many stories of individuals that started as a driver or started as a technician, are now in mid to upper level management within the industry. It's like a starting point. It's a great, great job if you want to have a professional career as a driver, and that's where you live because that's where you enjoy it. But there's so many opportunities beyond that in this industry that you can build a life on, as most of us right here are a testament to. So,
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. And
yeah, about a third of our management team were professional drivers at some point in their career.
Yeah, it's a great point. We hear it all the time, you know, amongst the members, and just coming up either through family, or this was it was supposed to be like a temporary thing, but then once they got in it, they loved it and they stayed and they never left, which we hear a lot. We hear a lot. There's something about this industry that just kind of pulls you in once you get in it.
Yep, you're not leaving.
But I think that's another great kind of lead in to the independent contractor issue, because they are such a vital component of this industry and just constantly under attack. And now with the Department of Labor ruling, which turned over a decision that had made during the Trump administration, we're really, I think, in a position now where we're threatening that model again, and whether or not independents can truly stay independent, because it's just getting harder and harder and harder for them to basically prove to the government that they're truly independent. So that was a big blow to the industry. I know there's been a lot out there in terms of coverage, but can you just maybe speak at a high level in terms of nationally what's going on? Is ATA and OOIDA working together on this issue? Like, how are we pushing back on this?
Yeah, so as you know, for probably 10, 15 years now, there's much of the interpretation is made at the state level. And you all in New York, I believe, what probably 5, 10 years ago, you had kind of a change to your law. Yeah. In California, clearly the most stringent a couple of years ago. And then what we don't like is this patchwork of state-to-state interpretations. Also, you have political appointees or elected officials who have their own bias, right, as opposed to having something that's statutory. So, you know, the premise that it would come from a federal agency is somewhat valid. The problem is it's rife with political bias. So there are a couple of different tacks that we're taking. Fundamentally, what we think is, provided everything is on the level, and maybe there are some entities, not just in trucking, but, you know, in many different segments of the economy that play fast and loose with employee classification or worker classification. I think that's fair to say that maybe some are on the margin, maybe pushing the envelope a little bit too much. It's not clear to all parties the rules of the game. However, provided things are on the level, people should have the choice whether to be an employee or an independent contractor when that opportunity is presented or that choice is presented. Similarly, if there's a union situation, people should have the choice whether to belong to the union or to not belong to the union, right? these are kind of in a developed economy. These are the choices that people should be afforded. So that is the basis for ATA's advocacy position. And we're very much pushing back against this recent U.S. Department of Labor rulemaking and going at it through multiple ways. First of all, just trying to educate policymakers that here we have several independent contractor ambassadors who are kind of going to in lobbying on industry's behalf to just kind of show this is the path I've chosen. Here are the benefits, the puts and takes associated with being an independent contractor, so that it's not this perception that they're all evildoers or that the companies are evildoers, right? Show them this and tell them the story and show them the case. Secondly, we're going at it through the congressional ranks, right? Trying to see if there's a way to tighten or remove funding associated with enforcement of those types of that rulemaking. And then finally, the Biden administration's appointee to become labor secretary is Julie Su, who held the same position at the state of California when AB 5 was enacted, which is the most onerous of them all. It really outlawed the independent contractor model, not for trucking, for all industries. Right. So if you're a freelance journalist or you're a fitness trainer, you are now, that practice is outlawed. You have to all be employees. So we're pushing it strongly against her confirmation, and we have the critical mass of senators opposing her, or we did just a year ago, and anticipate having the same numbers this time.
Yeah, which is great because it's destroying that entrepreneurial spirit, right? Like to your point, you should have the choice. And you had mentioned the legislation that we passed in New York State, and it's not perfect. It's a little messy, but it does the job. It does protect the right of individuals to operate as an independent contractor. And where we really made the difference, and this, we've touched on so many times in this podcast about the importance of engagement and advocacy, is when we were fighting that battle here, we brought independent contractors to the Capitol. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to make sure that the legislature could hear from them, could understand why they were independent. They weren't forced to be independent. This was a choice they were making. They were making great livings. And that really kind of turned the needle for us in terms of getting that legislation passed. So I think the independent contractor ambassadors the ATA has brought to the table is incredibly important as we're trying to address that issue for the industry.
Yeah, you see it, right? When real people go and make the case, and it's not simply legislators or, no offense, but hired gun right. lobbyists. When you bring real people forth, it's quite a compelling case.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It makes a huge difference. So I think, we're kind of coming up on some time here, but we can't get out of this conversation without talking about the environmental mm-hmm. initiatives at both the state and federal level. New York is quickly becoming California 2.0. They just tend to, pardon the pun, carbon copy everything that California does, and it's creating, all the issues that we've talked about as far as, the challenges associated with moving towards EV.
Well, except for the couple of times we would like them to copy, and that's when they choose not to. That happens in a couple of things.
I can speak to that quickly. So to provide a little color to that statement. So when New York was looking at adopting the advanced clean truck rule, we, as part of our comments, kept saying, you can't take what's in California and just simply apply it to New York. We're different states. You have to look at how this is going to impact our industry, do your own studies. And of course, they ignored all that and they adopted the rule, and it's becoming effective this year with the 2025 model year vehicles. And we're hearing there's problems where we can't sell vehicles mm-hmm. that people can't use, right? So fast forward, we made, I think, somewhat of a controversial decision to throw our support behind the clean fuel standard in New York. Hasn't passed. It passed our Senate. It hasn't passed the Assembly. And in a recent joint budget hearing, and they were asking questions of the Department of Environmental Conservation Commissioner, I'll get that all out, about the clean fuel standard. And why haven't we adopted this? It's shown to work in other states. And he literally said New York is not California. We can't simply copy what they did. And I about fell out of my chair. I said, okay, since when?
Exactly. That's when it would help.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of thrust into this topic last April when I was asked to testify at the U.S. Senate on behalf of our industry. And I learned a lot leading up to it. I had to study quite a bit. And then just as a fleet owner and operator for the 25 years to see the different steps we've taken in improving our environmental footprint. So what I encourage our members to do, my fellow TANI members and my fellow ATA members and truckers throughout the country, is to establish to all who will listen, whether they're all stakeholders, shippers, policymakers, enforcement officials, et cetera, you tell them, we want to improve our environmental impact. We want to decrease environmental impact associated with transportation. And in fact, we do, and we have.
Yeah.
Now, if we all just coalesce around that, right, that is our goal, is to reduce environmental impact associated with transportation. We are fully on board with that. Full stop. Now, that is virtuous. That goal is virtuous. And the people who express, I'm sure, Zach, like you deal with in the city area, hey, there are asthma and other sort of health consequences associated with emissions and smog. Absolutely, that is a valid point. Let's help you fix that. Now, if we then, what my experience is and what you're kind of communicating with respect to California to a certain extent, New York, is when you get wedded to a single technology to address that situation, you're no longer being virtuous. That's being dogmatic. Yeah. And what opened my eyes is, I'm in the ATRI board, and we always get kind of first crack at reading the research, which is tremendous. And particularly on this topic, I really encourage folks to go to truckingresearch.org, the American Transportation Research Institute, because we want to look at the entire life cycle of a vehicle. The tailpipe emissions are one segment of the entire life cycle. And what ATRI did is use because we're agnostic, right? So we as fleet owners and operators, we don't have a specific preference with respect to a powertrain or a fuel. What we care about is resilience. Even if you don't care, my experience is many politicians don't care about the economic consequences. Okay, so let's even set that aside for a second. What we need is a resilient ecosystem and infrastructure associated with the powering of those vehicles and the productivity of those vehicles. So when ATRI looked at the life cycle, a diesel internal combustion engine vehicle kind of being the baseline, going to a BEV Class 8 truck is about a 30% lifetime benefit in terms of overall environmental impact. Well, okay, that's meaningful. Now, you have to keep in mind, it's 7 times worse for the environment to build a battery electric truck, right? Think about the rare earths. We're raping and pillaging the earth to get the rare earths to produce this vehicle. Okay, so if it's a 30% lifetime benefit, that's meaningful. However, if the Wall Street Journal did a ride along with a truck, a drayage truck in the Port of Los Angeles in Long Beach area over Christmas and New Year's time. It was quite fascinating. A truck that typically does 6 turns a day with drayage containers was only able to do 2.
Yep.
Wow.
So, but generally the conclusion we've come to is about 30-40% more vehicles will be needed. So if it's 30% comparison vehicle to vehicle, but you're going to need 30-40% more vehicles, it's a wash or it's a net negative to the environment in total.
Yep.
So how else can we address this problem? And that sets aside the power generation and the trillions of dollars of infrastructure that's required. There is an application for battery electric trucks.
Yes.
And the market does a pretty good job of finding that. But California, for example, does not even acknowledge hybrids in the ACT, right? Yep. Which is pathetic. So imagine a vehicle that in the inner city area could run on electric and then over the road could go to internal combustion. To think that that's not a viable solution is just absolutely, that just shows the dogma as opposed to the logic. So we as you know, even what I kind of learned during the research a year ago is roughly half, let's use round numbers, roughly half of the Class 8 trucks in America are pre-2010. When we go from 2010 to today, we have roughly an 80% reduction in emissions. So if we really want to meaningfully reduce emissions and do it in an efficient manner, let's do a cash for clunkers type of thing. Get those old pre-2010 trucks off the road, and half of 80% means 40% aggregate reduction in emissions.
Done.
Bang.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so, but when we say, no, that we don't want to do that, well, geez, that is so incredibly efficient, then you're showing to me that somebody has convinced you that there's a sole technology that's the path. And Chris, as I mentioned, when we were in visit the EU in November, we met with their kind of transportation committee and members of 27 member states in the European Union, and all kind of different backgrounds, different power sources, et cetera. And they were coming up on their deadline, similar to what California had intended. They had to back off. They've now gone more technology neutral, and alternative fuels are welcome. Yeah. What else can we do to logically solve this problem? So typically we perceive the Europe to be kind of more progressive, so to speak, on this topic, but they have had to become more pragmatic. And that was kind of a little bit refreshing to see.
Yeah.
That's great. And that's why we prefer zero and near zero emission vehicles. That's the terminology. We know what the goal is to decarbonize by a certain date. Let's talk about the menu of options to get there. And, not for nothing, but Tanny, we work really, really hard on electrification. We partner with NYSERDA and City DOT on their clean truck and voucher scrappage programs. We're part of a really big comprehensive project called FEAST with CalSTART about, a workforce development and EV deployment program. I'm part of a task force in one of the industrial business zones, Zarega Avenue in the Bronx. But, at the same time, how much are we focusing on this one segment and ignoring some of these other technologies that will get us to that zero emission vehicle goal, over the next 20 or 15, 20 years?
Yeah. And I think that's an example of, and Chris Spears says this all the time, right? We start with yes. Mm-hmm. We're not saying no to electrification. It makes sense in certain applications, particularly areas like New York City, which is where a lot of the focus of these programs we're working on. We have members that are looking at it. We have a member that just purchased their first Class 8, and they're kind of piloting it out to see how it's going to work. So I don't think you're going to find too many people in the industry that would say it's a bad thing. It's the mandates. It's these timelines. It's this aggressive push towards EV as the sole solution, which is the problem and what is creating so many challenges and really anxiety, right, within the industry itself right now.
And at the same, I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
Yeah, and if we have the means, whether it's diesel powered or other powertrains or fuels, to get us to near zero, like you said, Zach, right? Let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good, right? And we have the path to the good is very clear, and it's right in front of us, and it's supported with a resilient infrastructure. That's when you get a little bit dismayed that why is this even politicized? This should be something that we're all pushing toward.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is, I mentioned we kind of made that controversial decision to throw our support behind the clean fuel standard. Part of it was because that is something that can incentivize renewable diesel coming into the state. And that's an immediate reduction. It's a drop in fuel. You do not have to make any additional investment in your vehicles. Like, it's immediate. And if the state really wants to have an impact on transportation-related emissions, that's an immediate way to do it that doesn't require people to purchase new vehicles. So you can still look towards, in the future, electrification, hybrids, and building that infrastructure out. But why would we turn our back on a solution that can start dropping those emissions today? And that's the part that we just can't quite wrap our arms around in terms of this sole focus on electric, because you're not going to have the impact on emissions that you want, because it's going to take us so long to get there.
And tying in with it has to be efficiency, making the freight network more efficient. And when vehicles are losing up to 40% payload, and we need to put, 2 new trucks on the road for every one current. That's not efficient. That's not efficient delivery. That's not efficient on our freight network. Right. That's not a great way of modeling things.
No, exactly. We could talk a lot about this issue. I think we're all somewhat passionate about it just because it's very frustrating. I think of a lot of the issues we're dealing with right now, this environmental initiative, while I think we all can agree with the goal, it's the how we get there that there's such a massive departure between the industry and those that regulate us. And it's just becoming, more frustrating by the day sometimes in terms of the rhetoric that's out there pushing this.
And I would just encourage fellow members, show people. So if you're an EPA SmartWay member, for example, you can show the improvement you've achieved over, say, the last 10 years and demonstrate that. So we furnish our clients every quarter the emission report for their work, for their lanes, for the, with respect to, metric tons of carbon, et cetera. So we measure all that, and then we furnish an output. And we have goals each year in terms of reduction in fuel consumption and emissions. And I'm a believer. We have the building I'm in here at our headquarters in Massachusetts is solar powered. I'm an investor in a solar business. It's not as if we don't want to harness energy through different channels. We're fully on board with that. And I'd also just like to say to fellow Tanny members, I had a blast coming up and meeting you and addressing you at your conference up in Clayton, lovely Lake Champlain in September. Great group of folks. And, Zach and Kendra, as you guys know, the stories, I just love going into a room and asking somebody, how did you get into this business? And it's really just fascinating how somebody said, well, I was doing this, as you guys mentioned, maybe they were an independent owner operator. And then all of a sudden they cobble together, now they get 50 employees, or the 100-year-old company I met that's a member of yours, or the private fleets of the big grocery chains. It's just such a diverse group, and the stories are inspiring, and it's a little microcosm of American exceptionalism. I was really glad to be a part of it.
Absolutely. And just wait until we start getting more of the success stories from the Jails to Jobs program. Yeah. And we'll have people at these conferences re-entering society, found their passion and their calling in trucking.
Very excited about that program. Andrew, we could talk all day. This has been great. Really appreciate you joining us. I think just kind of to wrap up, and it kind of is under the surface of everything that we talked about today, is how important associations are for this industry at the national level, at the state level. The advocacy, what we're trying to do to protect the industry, pushing back on things that are bad, or trying to move things forward that are good. And just the importance of being part of that. And I know you speak to this fair amount when you do your presentation. So maybe just kind of wrap up a little bit with that as we kind of come to the conclusion for today.
So empirically, this is not an opinion, fact that motor carriers who belong to a state or a national association are empirically safer. We have the data to back that up, thanks to our friends at ATRI. Secondly, you're smarter. You're smarter because you're more informed. You're more informed about the costs associated with doing this business. You're more familiar and informed about the risks associated with it, and you see where the puck not is just now, where the puck's going to be. So you can move and plan your strategy for your business accordingly. And then finally, you get to have this peer group where, hey, I've met folks that we end up doing business with because there's a relationship. Hey, you do that? Well, we have the need for that and we can't do it. Can you do this? And likewise, we kind of have a little referral network. And then you just, particularly among the professionals, say if you're in maintenance, if you're in safety, you can share best practices that are not competitive. So it's a no-brainer. And finally, you want to move, there are leaders and leeches, right? So leaders belong to Tanny, leaders belong to ATA. What should this industry look like? You should influence legislation. You should influence regulation. You should influence tax policy. It's not that we shouldn't be regulated or taxed, but you want to make sure that you're influencing those outcomes because they have serious effects on your business.
Yep, absolutely. No, that's great. Like I said, we could stay here always enjoy talking with you. Appreciate you taking the time out to join us today. Just so much going on. And to your point, like, you have to be part of it to be able to influence it. So, if you're not a member of ATA, if you're not a member of TANI, please consider joining us. The more voices we have, the stronger we are, and just critically important across the board. So with that, I think, Andrew, any closing thoughts, and we'll wrap up.
No, just I think just like the folks who volunteer on your committees at the state level, that on your board of directors, there are many of us doing that at the national level. We care about it. We care about the 8 million people who work in this industry. We want to make it not just environmentally sustainable, we want to make it economically sustainable for the long term. And that's why we volunteer in this capacity. So we appreciate your support. Let's get after it.
All right, great. Well, Andrew, thank you so much again for being with us. That is another episode of Key Up New York. Really appreciate everybody listening in today. Share us, like us, tell your friends about us, and we'll see you next time.
Be a leader. Subscribe to our podcast.
Don't be a leech. Thank you.